Well, here we are, everybody, back for another round, episode 83 this week. We are all about the expansion draft, which is in July, so we are getting real close. Stanley Cup playoffs will start here shortly with 10 games or less for most of the teams this season for the 56-game schedule. From the looks of it, most, if not all, will get to play all 56 games, pending anything catastrophic to close out the year. And then we will get to the playoffs. Teams are clinching. The playoffs are starting to take shape, so make sure you look at that. And then after that, playoffs will go. Obviously, there's some things up in the air depending on travel and border based on later rounds in the playoffs. Once Canadian teams specifically, once one Canadian team specifically moves on from the Canadian division to play United States-based teams later in the playoffs. But that bridge will get crossed once they get there in regards to bubbles or anything like that. This week is all about the expansion draft as is coming in July. Expansion draft, entry draft, free agency, all the good stuff for the offseason in hopes of what the NHL says to be an October start for the 21-22 NHL season, which is the inaugural season for the Seattle Kraken, which is what we are kind of discussing this week. Going into details, we are expanding on expansion. Kind of a little play on words there for you. But episode 83 of War Room the Hockey Podcast. Head to the necessary social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram, War Room the Hockey Podcast, and at War Room the Hockey Podcast, respectively. Make sure you like and you follow us there. Engage with us. Write in, share stories, ask questions, anything you want to know or anything you want mentioned or anything like that. We'd be happy to give you a shout out and share that information. Make sure you head to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, subscribe, and then rate and review. That's the big one. Subscriptions it's all big, and we appreciate all the support. But ratings and reviews are the big one to help the show climb the charts on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we appreciate the support, and we appreciate your continued loyalty with us and faithfulness to our brand here and the information we give. So we appreciate it. Anyway, War Room the Hockey Podcast, episode 83, expanding on expansion this week. Enjoy. All right, well, we're back via Zoom. Nothing is in person yet, unfortunately, but we are still able, the beauty of technology is able to do it via Zoom to bring at least some content for our listeners.
Yeah, it's good to be back again, as always. Looking forward to this.
Headline real quick, get your thoughts on it too, on the ESPN TNT deal the NHL just made, and what that might bring for quality of content. And I say that because I don't know if you saw it. You're not necessarily on. Well, I know you're not. It's not a necessarily thing. It's completely. You're not on social media or anything. But one of the things that TNT did after signing the deal to promote it was they posted a graphic of Alex Ovechkin with the captain of the Edmonton Oilers. Now, I say the captain of the Edmonton Oilers because I'm sure you can guess by me saying that it wasn't Connor McDavid. So there was a graphic of Alex Ovechkin and Andrew Ference.
Oh, okay.
And that kind of made me chuckle because it's like you just signed a deal to put out hockey content, and you're not even, with exception of Ovechkin, you're not even in the relevancy of current times of what's going on, and so, and ESPN is going to bring in Stephen A. Smith. You know that.
Well,
because they just he put out a segment on ESPN a couple weeks ago, a 15-minute segment of Stephen A. Smith, all about the things that he knows about hockey. And it was him going on about the things he knows about hockey. And
how did he fill 15 minutes?
Because he likes to talk.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
It's Stephen A. Smith. He likes to. So, and I don't want to get in the realm of bad mouthing anybody, but I wanted to get your thoughts on the new content rights media deals that have happened, because TNT and ESPN have notoriously not been great with their hockey content in the past. So,
well, and I'll try not to venture too far off topic either, but I'll just say that I have not watched United States ESPN in 15 years. None. I know what they're all about. They're a political machine that I can't stand. Their content is weak. What little I've ever seen on ESPN of hockey, it was just soft. It's bad. I don't know who they're planning to have, if they're going to take, the NHL Network is still going to be around, of course. And people like Catherine Tappan, she does a nice job there, and they've got some good analysts on there, Pat Sharp and Jonesy and guys like that. But in general, I look for this ESPN deal, and the who is it? Who's the other network? The other cable network?
TNT. Turner.
TNT. It's going to be Turner. Come on, we all know what Turner's about. We all know what ESPN's about. You have to follow. You have to toe a certain political line there. And all that aside, if you can possibly ignore the woke rhetoric, then you're going to be left with really, really soft hockey content. You're going to be left with what I would call beginner hockey. Yeah. So if all you've ever done is watched a few games on television, it's probably going to be perfectly entertaining. If you've ever played, coached, scouted, managed, been inside the room, been inside development, if you've spent a lot of time knowing a lot about the game, it's just going to be so soft and so dumb that there'll be no point in watching it, which I won't do. I mean, we will always, I'm unhappy enough with the direction that Sportsnet and TSN have taken, as you know, starting with cutting Don Cherry loose and taking it over from CBC and reformatting the entire Hockey Night in Canada. It's not about hockey, and it's not about Canada anymore. The only thing left of Hockey Night in Canada is the night part. It takes place at night. Otherwise, most of that is gone. But I will stop railing now. You want the short answer, it's going to stink. But most people, honestly, it will serve an entertainment audience.
Yep.
If you're looking for a hockey analysis, you're not going to get it. If you're looking for entertainment, it'll be fine.
Yep. It makes the league money too.
Yep.
Right? To have those rights purchased, and to have, here's our content, we're selling it to you. Now you have the right to, to put it out, and that for this price. It makes, in the COVID era, it makes the league a chunk of change, and so
and that's what they get paid to do. They don't get Bettman's media office, and I think it's still Glenn Adamo, who I met back in the 90s. They do a great job, and they've probably negotiated what will be a very, very good deal for the ownership, which is who Gary Bettman works for. And as far as the specifics of the content, that's not their job. Yep. So, and they'll be in lockstep, because there'll be a lot of wokeness going on. But yeah, it'll be good for the players and the ownership, because it'll bring the cap back up post COVID to where it belongs, and that's their job.
Yep, agreed. Also, NHL preparing to adjust Stanley Cup playoffs if needed, given the border situation. As a hockey fan, take a positivity that Bettman and the league seem bent on getting the playoffs completed no matter what it takes. But they are willing to adjust, and I'm assuming that means going to a bubble situation or something like that again, in order to get it done if teams aren't able to travel provincially, let alone across the border or anything like that. So there's that question in the air.
That's good. And I think they've, as we've talked about many times, they've done a really good job of getting the season finished and the playoffs done last year. I thought that was masterful. The bubbles went well. This year has been good, except for the fact that they can't have fans in most buildings up until recently, and that's not their problem. I mean, it's their problem. It's not their. They didn't cause it. They had to respond to the way that provinces and states and the government was dictating to them, which is shameful. But they got through that, and we're going to have at least a reasonable facsimile of a regular season. And I think they'll get the same thing done with the playoffs, because except for Canada, things are getting done and changed for the positive in the United States. Things are getting done at a pretty rapid level and have been since last summer. So I think they will figure out a way to get it done. Might mean that once the first couple of rounds are over with, that the winner of the North Division has to, well, they won't have to quarantine, because when they come to the United States, there's no quarantine required. So I would look for the third and fourth round of the playoffs to all take place someplace in the United States, regardless of who's in it.
Yep. Don't want to give too much attention to it, partly because we want to jump into our conversation, but also because I don't want this show to be lost in anything political in any way. But making headlines the past week or so were the comments made by Robin Lehner. I don't know if you saw those.
I saw that. Yeah.
I don't agree with a lot of things about him. But one thing I do back is his push for mental health, and his, again, avoid it as much as possible. But for the sake of honesty, I do back him on his sentiment regarding the comments he made. Now, was there a better way to maybe have said it? Sure. But the comments he made, I think, are factual.
They are. The only place that he ran off course a bit was when he said the league promised that this would be fixed and it'd be over, and they really didn't. I never saw where the league committed to, once we're vaccinated or once the testing is over or something like that, that everything will be back to normal. I don't remember that ever happening. If it did, the league is not confessing to it, because that's the first response I saw was, we never promised you that. Now, should they have? Probably. I know there's been a lot, probably everybody within the league's bubbles have been vaccinated. Most of the country in the United States has been vaccinated. And certainly everybody at risk has been vaccinated. Yeah. So if you believe in the vaccine, then the masks should come off and everybody should go back to work and back to the gym and back to the restaurants and everything as normal. Yep. And I don't see any logic that says otherwise. So I think he's just saying what everybody else is thinking, which is enough is enough. Let's get back to normal here and stop shutting things down because some young, if you're a 22-year-old professional athlete in the National Hockey League with the heart and lungs of a lion, you are not at risk, nor should you be treated like you're at risk, whether or not you have a positive test. If you have a positive test, stay home for a day or two, make sure you don't get sick, but shut down the entire team, shut down the schedule, shut down cities for a positive test on a person that has zero risk. No sense in it. I think that's where his frustration came from. And you're right, it was not said as articulately as he might have wanted, but the point,
context and what the point he's making is accurate.
Yeah.
So, but it goes to the sentiment of, if you're that paranoid, then just stay home.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't.
Technically, by definition, and this is all I'm going to say about it, we're moving on because now we're going down the rabbit hole. But by definition, quarantine is for the sick.
Correct.
So if you're sick, you're quarantined. But the way this has been going for a year and a half now is everybody's quarantined and everybody's isolated and everybody's shut down no matter what. Yeah. Even if you're fully healthy and all this stuff, you're, nope, sorry, so it's a mess, which is why I agree with the context of what Lehner said.
Yep. And he
If
has
you
every
believe in masks, then let people wear masks and go out in public. Okay, well now here's the vaccine. Well, if the vaccine supposedly works like you claim it does, then why do you still have to wear masks and why do you still have to be isolated?
exactly.
So at some point you have to buy into your own BS, if you will,
Right.
with everything, and either mask or no mask, vaccine or no vaccine, but pick one and go with it, because this back and forth stuff of I'm vaccinated but you still have to wear a mask. I'm vaccinated but now you have to wear 2 masks. All this stuff is getting kind of old. And I think outside the extreme sides of the social political realm of it, the majority of people can agree that enough's enough. Let's
We
start.
flattened your dumb curve.
Yeah.
We're done with that in March of last year. So why are we still floundering around? Why are we making up new stuff every week and every month to close things up?
From a revenue perspective,
sure.
I think the league at some point here, whether it be next season or anything, is going to have to just kind of go. We're done with the testing, and we're going to open our doors to our buildings, and we're just going to play, because this can only go so long where you have a flat cap and you either have no fans or only have fans to a certain capacity, and you only this and that. It's only going to go so long,
right,
before teams like Arizona and these teams start to flounder even more than they already have financially. So you're going to have to, plus players, right, wrong, or indifferent, call them overpaid, call them selfish, call them whatever you want, but players are going to want to get paid no matter what the situation is, and organizations can only do that if they've got the right revenue in to do that. Correct? So
correct.
At some point, the league's going to have to just kind of go, all right, we've done what we can, now let's just go, because we've got to make money.
If you don't feel like you're safe, if you go to a hockey game, then don't go to a hockey game. Don't renew your tickets. Sell them to somebody else. If you want to go to the game and wear a mask, then do that. If you don't want to play and play out your contract because you feel like you're going to die of COVID, then stay home. Yeah. And we'll take you we'll put you on long-term injured reserve, and you can, or put you on waivers. But the players are going in debt. The money that they're getting paid this year is way more than their percentage of hockey revenue. So they're going to have to pay that all back, and it'll take 2 or 3 years to do so. So they're not only going to be making flat cap money and taking haircuts on contracts, but they're also going to be paying back all the money they got paid this year that the league did not bring in, because the ownership, the National Hockey League, and the owners in the league, they financed the players' salaries this year. Yep. Well, the players are going to pay that back. So you got flat cap. Now you're in debt. If you made $5 million this year, you probably got to pay back $1.5 million next year on your $5 million contract, plus your 15 or 20% escrow and all your taxes and everything else. It's going to start to be a bloodbath for guys. And yes, I can say that a kid making $5 million is going to take a bloodbath, because he might be left with $600,000 when it's all over with. I don't know. We haven't seen that yet, but it's got to be done. And back to your point about Robin Lehner, he has, whether you agree with him or not, or whether you agree with how he said it or not, he has purchased the right to make a mental health-based statement about how this COVID debacle has been handled, not just by the NHL, but by the government and by all the provinces, by the states, and why this has been such an absolute kerfuffle, because it is a mental health issue. And he's purchased that right because he has been out in public and very respectfully banging the mental health drum, which he has experienced firsthand.
Yep.
So don't agree with him if you change the channel, if you don't like what he's saying, but he belongs with that. He belongs with that forum. He belongs in that to have that podium.
Yep. Mental health is important, so he has
Yep.
the right to do that. Being said, all right, we're going to move on here and get into the meat of this week. which is the details and the nitty-gritty, if you will, of the expansion draft. Seattle is coming in, the Seattle Kraken coming in this summer. I know they've still got some decisions to make on coaching staff and all that stuff, but the expansion draft is coming, and so it is coming fast. I know it's June or July, correct?
It's June as of right now.
Okay. Yeah, so it's June, and then jump into everything else, and then they're guaranteed a pretty good chance at not only the first overall, but they're guaranteed, I believe, what did we say, a top 6 or a top 4?
I think they're guaranteed top 6, and their odds to get beyond that are what 18% or something. I'd have to look at the draft lottery breakdown. But
so they can take 7 forwards. Teams can protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie, or 8 skaters and 1 goalie.
Correct.
Entry-level contracts are exempt. No movement clauses are exempt.
Under 3 years experience are exempt.
Under, I think I have it here, and I can get to it. I think it's 2 seasons worth of play.
And that's professional play. That could be in
professional
play, AHL or in the coast.
Yeah, that's professional play. Vegas is exempt, which is ridiculous, but they're exempt.
Yeah. Do you want to take the lead on that Vegas discussion, or do you want me to? Because that has to be said. That's got to be part of any expansion draft discussion. Has to be the fact that as of this recording, as of the end of April, the Vegas Golden Knights have won 10 in a row.
Yeah.
They are at the top of the NHL rankings. They are ranked number 1 in the power rankings, which is goal differential. They've won 10 games in a row. They've been at the top of the league since they won their first game 3 years ago, and they're still there, and they are still exempt from giving up a player.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. The money says I want the right to have a good team, but this has been overdone.
It's overdone. To me, I'd say they could be exempt if Seattle came into the league last year or the year before.
Right.
But once you get to 3 years or 5 years, now, okay, you're an established organization within the league, and
Yep.
why you're exempt is just ridiculous.
Yep.
So now every team especially in the flat cap COVID era, every team is bound to lose a quality player.
Correct.
Not just a unprotected piece, a quality player, except Vegas. So now you're basically guaranteed that Seattle and Vegas now are going to be the top 2 teams in the NHL moving forward, because Vegas doesn't lose an Alex Tuck or somebody like that because they're exempt from having to lose a player.
Yep. So as the listener evaluates what is going to happen to his favorite team or her favorite team's roster, you just simply look at subtract all the no move clauses, subtract whether your team is going to protect. The logical choice would be to protect 7 forwards, 4 defensemen, and a goaltender. That would make the most sense. Then beyond those 12 players, subtract anyone who has less than 3 years service as a professional. And there are some quirks to that rule depending on your age. But so if you are 20 years old prior to December 31st, you're exempt.
Yep.
Unless you have played 11 games or more for at least the last 2 or 3 seasons, which is nearly impossible to be 18 and have more than 2 seasons of service in any professional league. If you are over 20 from December 31st on, then it's only 1 game constitutes a season. So
yep.
That's not going to be a big factor most likely, but your entry-level guys, as you said, exempt. Your, let's call it 12 guys that you're going to protect. then take among those have to be your no move clauses.
Unless they waive.
Sorry?
Unless they waive.
Unless they waive that. Correct.
They can waive the no move clause, but if they don't, they count against protected list. Seattle must draft at least 14 forwards, 9 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders. And 3 goalies. At least.
And that's 26. They get to draft 30, obviously, one from each team. So once they've got their minimums, they can take whatever else they want or need from the exposed pool.
20 of those players must be under contract during the 21-22 season.
Exactly.
And then they must stay compliant with the $81.5 million salary cap.
Yep.
But they must take at least $48.9 million worth of salary for next season. What's that?
Run that by me again?
So Seattle must stay compliant with the $81.5 million salary cap, but must take at least $48.9 million worth of salary for next season.
Correct. Okay, so that's their salary minimum, basically, right?
So basically, that's the cap floor. Basically, they're saying that you must have at least $48.9 million under contract worth of salary, but you have to stay compliant, as in not go over the 81.5. Is basically what is being said. Seattle will have the opportunity to negotiate with pending UFAs and RFAs before the other 31 teams. That way they can reach the limit in July. Players must have played 2 full professional seasons by the end of 2021.
Right.
Which is based on the rules from the NHL, which is at least 9 games per season of the 2 professional seasons, which is AHL or the NHL. A team must expose at least 2 forwards and 1 defenseman who have played at least 27 games in 2020 and 2021, or 54 games from 2019 to 2021 under contract for next season.
And a goalie who is either under contract or will be an RFA.
Yeah. The team must expose a goalie under contract who is under contract for 21-22 or can become an RFA after this season.
Yeah.
Now help me explain that a little bit to me. And this might be me overlooking it. Does that mean that if a goaltender is becoming a UFA after this year, therefore isn't under contract with somebody, they're exempt from being taken without having to be protected? Or
Great question.
And I say that personally from a personal Avalanche perspective, just simply on the basis of Dubnyk is a no move clause.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he has a no move clause.
Didn't know that.
But Grubauer is a UFA after this year.
So they can expose
along with Landeskog. He and Landeskog are UFAs after this year. So the reason I asked for clarification on that is simply because I too am still like to learn things, and based on the wording of that, would that mean that because Grubauer is not under contract for 21-22, that he is exempt from having to be protected, but also exempt from even being taken by Seattle because he's not an RFA, but he's also not under contract for next year? That's a curious thought for me.
I believe, and that's a little bit complex, but my understanding is, if I have this correct, he is eligible because he is UFA, correct?
Yep.
He's not going to be an RFA at the end of the year.
No.
Okay. He's UFA. He is eligible to be left unprotected, or he is eligible to be left unprotected, but Seattle gets to negotiate with him prior to.
So they can negotiate with him as a free agent.
Right.
But in terms of selecting him from the Avalanche as a pick in the expansion draft, is he exempt on all levels because he's not wouldn't be under contract and isn't an RFA?
They are required to expose a goaltender who is under contract or will be an RFA. So if they don't have him signed at least for one more season, then I don't believe he is eligible to be left unprotected. Even though Seattle would get the first opportunity to negotiate a deal with him, I don't believe he qualifies. I think it has to be someone under contract, which now if Dubnyk is in a no-move clause, then they have to protect him. They have no choice. So now what do you do?
Unless he waives.
Unless he waives it.
And this was kind of my argument last week when I mentioned it. Unless this was Sakic's magic with how he did it, and that is, because Dubnyk's on the tail end of his career. So I'll pull you out of San Jose, who, while they're playing pretty good hockey and they're right there to make the 4th seed, right? They're competing, they're whatever. The likelihood is they don't make it. So I'll pull you out of San Jose, give you another chance with a competitive team to make a deep playoff run, potentially maybe win a Stanley Cup. We'll give you that run. We do that for you. Then because this is a expansion year, you then waive your no-move clause, and we put you up, and we give you a chance to still continue to play hockey if Seattle chooses to take you. Right. Therefore, you then combine that with what I believe I understand this point that we were just talking about to mean for somebody like Grubauer. And now we've exposed you, and now we can protect a Francouz or somebody like that. Right. Knowing that Grubauer and Francouz, unless Grubauer decides, yes, I'm signing in Seattle or somewhere, then you know that you can get Grubauer re-signed and have Francouz, and you've still got a goalie tandem.
My guess.
So unless that's the way it works,
I would hope that you're right, and that would make sense to me. That there's been a handshake deal that at the end of the year will miraculously see Dubnyk waiving his no-move clause in return for being traded to a contender, getting a chance to run his value up in case he can sign an extension with someone, and that someone is more likely to be Seattle than anybody else in the league right now. Yeah. So that would make the most sense for Devan Dubnyk, for Joe Sakic, and for Doug Wilson in San Jose to have made that deal.
Yeah. So anyway, wanted to use the Avalanche as an example because I know a lot about them, but that's a question I had when I read that point of what that could mean for a situation like that, where and everything like that. But anyway, here's an interesting note too on the injury front for the expansion draft. Players with potential career-ending injuries who have missed the last 60-plus games, 60-plus consecutive games due to injury, in certain cases could be deemed exempt from the expansion draft selection process.
Right.
So if you've missed 60-plus games due to injury, depending on the circumstance, you could be deemed exempt, which means a team gets to protect you simply because of your injury. Potentially. That's not a guarantee, but in certain cases it could mean that.
I believe that's not necessarily a discretionary thing, but the league can look at a guy, let's just say, for example, it was McDavid with the knee injury a year and a half ago. They look at him and go, okay, he hasn't played the last X number of games, so technically he's not qualified to be taken in the expansion draft. But they can make that. What I'm saying is they can make an exception. I think there's a lot. That's the one part of this where the league seems to have written in some, like, we'll review these injury issues. And so if there's somebody who's been on LTIR, take a Kucherov, for example, or something like that, and he may not be the right guy because of no move or something. But if there's somebody on LTIR, the league can step in and say, Yes, but he's been cleared to play starting in August or September or whatever, and they can review that. And so that's the one part of the expansion rules where there is some discretion, some gray area.
Yeah. Here's a question on no move clauses. Kind of get your insight a little bit on what you might know about it. Guys like, for example, I'm looking at it here, Chicago. Brent Seabrook is a no move clause, but he's also retired.
Right.
Now, does he, because he's still under contract, listed under contract because he retired early, would he still count against Chicago as a protected guy, or does he come off the board because he's retired?
Once you officially, when you retire, like Ryan Miller just announced that he's going to retire at the end of the year, teams are going to guys like that and saying, and Brent Seabrook's a great example. I'm glad you brought that up. Once you have to file retirement, official retirement with the league office. So once that's done, your insurance, your contract, your exposure to things like whether you have any time remaining on your contract, your liability to pay escrow and things like that, everything is affected once you sign your official retirement document, which is, by the way, on a related topic, which is where Dustin Byfuglien got in trouble last year, because at the end of the season he filed his retirement document, said I'm leaving, and then a few months later came back and said, well, I want my $8 million salary because I have this ankle injury. But he had already cleared his retirement physical, so he was not eligible to get that pay or the long-term injured reserve pay for being an active player. So in the question, if I haven't lost myself already, Brent Seabrook is not necessary. They will not need to protect him because he has filed his league documents. He's filed for retirement. So no.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Expansion draft here is July 21st.
Okay.
So it's not June. It's July 21st.
Oh, okay. The last I saw it was June. Okay, so July 21st.
Yeah, protection lists need to be finalized by July 17th. Seattle will have their exclusive negotiating rights with free agents window from July 18th to the 21st. If the Kraken sign a UFA in that window, that counts as their selection against the roster of that player's former team.
Perfect. Okay, so that makes sense.
So, like, to continue on the example we made, if they don't have, for example, Colorado doesn't have Grubauer re-signed by that point, and Seattle negotiates with him because that's the goalie they want, and he signs, that is the player selection from Colorado. Now Colorado doesn't have to worry about anybody else being taken or having to negotiate trade-wise or this or that to protect this guy. Grubauer's the guy they selected, if that's the UFA that Seattle signs. Okay, so that clarifies it. Okay.
Right. That makes sense. And along those lines, this is where the back room deals take place. This is where the bar napkin and a beer deals happen, because if Sakic and Ronnie Francis get together and decide that, well, I want Grubauer, and Sakic says, no, I'm not, I'm going to protect him, I'm going to sign him and protect him, and Francis says, okay, well, I really want him, so that will make everybody else exempt on your entire roster. I won't take any of your guys with my extra 4 picks after I've taken all my required guys. I still have 4 picks left. You're done. And if you'll let me take Gruby and not have to worry about any of the rest of your roster, I'll give you a 2nd round pick.
Right.
Or something to that effect. And that's how these or I'll leave I don't know, one of your Connor Timmins, for example. I'll leave him alone. or yeah, because he would qualify. I'll leave Connor Timmins alone, but you give me a third rounder,
Right.
or a second rounder, or whatever. And that's how Francis will stockpile draft picks for the future,
Right.
and build a decent roster, and then everybody gets what they want.
On that note, in my research, I found an article from Sportsnet titled nine teams with interesting conundrums ahead of the expansion draft. And in the introduction to the article, they talk exactly about that. They talk, let's see, let me find it here. They talk about when the Knights had their expansion draft, George McPhee made side trades with a number of teams.
Yes.
These would give Vegas an extra asset or two for taking a specific player instead of a more valued one who couldn't be protected. Looking back, and I'm quoting here again, no plagiarism on our part here, quoting the article, looking back, a few of those turned out unnecessary, and with Vegas finishing well on top. For instance, Anaheim traded Shea Theodore to Vegas so that they would take Clayton Stoner instead of Josh Manson. Again, Shea Theodore, they must not have been high on him in Anaheim, but Florida dealt Riley Smith to Vegas, who also then took Jonathan Marchessault. The question being, have GMs learned something from the 2017 expansion draft, thus meaning they might not be so eager to fall into similar traps with Seattle?
You better believe it.
They have that experience to draw from, and they've been able to plan things out about the expansion draft for some times. Then again, the flat cap is a variable no one saw coming, so there will still be unavoidable situations where losing a good player is inevitable, and a side deal may be appealing. Here's a quote from Ron Francis. We're certainly hoping there's a lot of different opportunities. It's a quote from his post-trade deadline call. There's a lot of different ways you can look at things, so we're analyzing everything and having those discussions. It'll be interesting to see what they do with some of their players, especially RFAs with arbitration rights this summer and managing their cap. Francis continued, a lot of teams have some really good young players whose contracts are coming up. It's a challenge to find money to pay those guys. We're looking at all those different situations and a lot of different teams and trying to see if there's something there that makes sense for us. Interesting stuff to see. It'll be interesting to see with COVID, the flat cap, all that stuff, how GMs handle it, especially after the pitfalls and traps of the 2017 situation, to where maybe Anaheim doesn't lose another Shea Theodore, maybe they, and all that stuff. So
I'll tell you what, the short answer to all this is there is no short answer, because each team is going to have to look at each guy and is going to look at their salary cap, see who's coming next year, who's coming off the cap this season, who are we going to have to sign next year. You're going to make these player exposures contingent on presuming flat cap, seeing who's in your pipeline that's going to be up for a new contract next season, because this season will have been over, who you can afford, who you can't, players' ages, players' eligibility based on no moves and things like that. This is an extremely complex equation to come up with who gets left unprotected, and who do you really, there's going to be guys in your system that are qualified that you're going to have to protect or lose or face losing, but my God, you can't protect them all. So that's where those side deals get made. Yes, my guy here, Zach Hyman. Yep. I don't want to lose him, but and you want him, but if I throw in a second rounder next year, will you leave him alone? Will you take Pierre Engvall instead? So there's going to be so much of that going on. Like, these guys won't sleep for a month prior to this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, transitioning, we'll close out here with continuing with the article, the teams that they've listed who are facing some interesting situations. We'll see how much of it we agree with to kind of close out the expansion draft discussion. They start in the article here with Sportsnet with Colorado. Colorado based on the article, it said that what Colorado needs to happen is for Eric Johnson to waive his no move clause.
Mm-hmm.
However, even if he does that, and I'm quoting the article here, the Avalanche will stand to lose a good player or be looking to make a deal. If Johnson does waive, his contract expires in 2023. The Avs would have a tough choice between protecting 8 skaters or 7 forwards and 3D. The former would leave the Avs having to expose Burakovsky, Donskoy, Jost, Nichushkin. The latter would likely expose Ryan Graves, who is a 25-year-old defensive blue liner who has another 2 years on a affordable $3.1 million contract. The other thing facing Colorado, still quoting the article here, Gabe Landeskog is a pending UFA, but it's safe to count him among the protected in anticipation of him getting an extension. It's possible he's left unsigned and unprotected with a deal lined up to re-sign with Colorado afterwards. That would open up another forward protection slot in either scenario, but maybe too risky of a proposition. So there's that interesting thing. The Colorado situation is closed out in the article by saying if Johnson doesn't waive his no move clause, then things get murky. Along with him, there's Girard, Makar, and Taves, who all need to be protected, forcing the Avs into the 8 skater route and leaving Seattle to choose from any of the forwards mentioned above or Ryan Graves. Because it does create the situation for Colorado of who you protect if no move clauses are waived and everything goes well in that regard. Who do you protect? Because you can either go 8 skaters and protect all of Girard, Makar, Taves, and Graves, but that leaves you 4 forwards to protect, which McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog, and 1 more.
Right.
Or you protect 7 forwards, 3D, which is likely Girard, Makar, and Taves.
Yeah.
Opening up a Ryan Graves. So either way, they're looking to lose somebody. The beauty of Colorado's system with their pipeline is you've got a Bowen Byram, you've got a Timmins, which they're still hopeful on. You've got an Alex Newhook. You've got Sampo Ranta. You've got all these young guys that are still there. Martin Kaut, Logan O'Connor, things like that. On the back end, what's that?
You can only lose 1.
Yeah, and on the back end, you got a guy that I've told you personally that I really like, which is Jacob McDonald. So you've still got him on the back end. So I don't want to see Graves or anybody go, but that's the interesting situation for a team like Colorado.
Well, I'll close up this discussion this way. I heard a GM say just a couple days ago that a former GM say that when he was in the chair, it was important for him during his career to never make a ridiculously lopsided trade. So if a guy phones and says, I understand you're interested in JT Compher. Okay, yeah, what do you want for him? And I say, well, I'm interested in so-and-so. An honest GM will say, I've watched this kid develop since he was 15. You don't want him. He won't fit with you. He won't fit with your coaching staff, which is another thing I'll get to in just a second. But the bottom line was you treat these other guys right. And most of the time, especially in a case where Joe Sakic and Ronnie Francis played together for Team Canada for years, they played against each other for 15 years. If you're treating each other with respect, Joe can go to Ronnie Francis and say, who are you looking at? Like, here's who I'm thinking about exposing. Who are you going to take? Or who do you want? And if we have to make a deal so I can protect this guy and you can take any one of these other 4 or 5 other guys, like, what will that cost me? Will that cost me a conditional 3rd rounder, a 2nd rounder? If you make the playoffs, it'll cost this. Like, those are the kind of deals that you want to make because you're honest with them and you don't put, we joke about a GM who's drowning because his goaltender's hurt and somebody's always ready to throw you an anchor. if you don't do that, you certainly have the odds in your favor that it's going to come back and help you. The other thing that Francis has to do between now and then is look at his coaching staff, because as you know as well as anybody, the team and the coaching staff have to get along. Your leadership on that team, your veterans that you're going to take in that draft, and the style of play that you want to play. You look how bad it was when Tortorella was in Vancouver. That was just a bad fit.
Yep.
There are bad fits everywhere. There are great fits. Daryl Sutter with the Kings years ago. You have to have a coaching staff that can communicate with your guys, especially with your leaders, and you have to draft a team. You can't draft a major up-tempo, fast team with a guy that doesn't coach that way.
Right.
So this is all going to have to come together before these decisions are made as well, because I would guarantee you right now, Ronnie Francis has no idea who he's going to take just yet. He's waiting for too many things to take place.
Would it be a negative then that he is yet to have a coaching staff?
Yes. He needs to at least put a head coach in place before long. He needs to have a head coach, and if his scouting and player development and his assistants in that whole assembly of a roster, if those aren't in place soon, it's going to be more and more troublesome for him.
Yeah, agreed.
Going to help too.
Close out, finish real quick. We'll run through these other teams they have listed in this article that face some situations. Don't have to go into too much detail, just run through it real quick. Edmonton, there's a lot of factors in Edmonton. Oscar Klefbom, who's not played a game this season due to a shoulder injury. Let's see. Klefbom would have been an auto protect before, but now there's at least some question about his long-term health. The other factor is how Ken Holland will handle his key UFAs. Adam Larson, Nugent Hopkins, Tyson Barrie are all up. If any of them resigns before the expansion draft, they'd likely be protected. Nugent Hopkins resigns, the Oilers will have to do a 7-3-1 situation, or else they'd be leaving Puljujarvi or Yamamoto unprotected. Leaving him unsigned would give Edmonton flexibility to protect more defensemen, but that brings big risk Nugent Hopkins doesn't return. If the Oilers take the most likely course and do use the 7-3-1 protection method, the decision on Klefbom looms large. Darnell Nurse will take up one slot. Ethan Bear could fill another. If Larson or Barrie resigns and Klefbom takes up a slot, suddenly Ethan Bear is the one who gets left unprotected. Then there's Caleb Jones, who seemingly could only be protected if the UFA defensemen don't re-sign and Klefbom is exposed. Yet another team that could lose a guy like Ethan Bear, who is a solid guy. All centered around the question, kind of like Colorado, there's a question of one guy and whether or not he's either protected or does or does not waive his no-move clause. Another team, which is the surprise team of the year, if you ask me, did not see them being where they are, Minnesota. Potential of waiving a no-movement clause is a huge factor in Minnesota's plans. Again, have to reiterate this every now and then, quoting the article. Did not all come from me, quoting the Sportsnet article. Zach Parise, Matt Zuccarello, Jared Spurgeon, Ryan Suter, and Jonas Brodin all have no-move clauses. Most of them would be players you would choose to protect anyway, but would say Parise waive his clause to give them the team more flexibility. If he doesn't, the Wild find themselves in a spot where they'll have to make a side deal or lose a solid player. Without any waived clauses, the Wild could make Matt Dumba their fourth protected defenseman and be able to protect two more forwards between Fiala, Eriksson Ek, and Greenway. However, those are three of their top five scorers this season, and all are under 25 years of age. Or the Wild could protect each of those three plus another couple of forwards, maybe a re-signed Nick Bonino, and leave Matt Dumba unprotected. In this scenario, perhaps they look to trade Dumba elsewhere before protected lists are due. At that point, you could trade Dumba for a couple of draft picks, and now you lose the conundrum of, well, what do we do if we have to protect him? There's A goalie to consider too, with Capo Kakinen protected. Cam Talbot could be a goalie option after his strong season. He is signed through 2023. All this to suggest that the Wild are an excellent candidate to make a side deal with Seattle, just as they did with the Golden Knights. In that expansion draft, the Wild sent Alex Tuch to Vegas,
Right.
For a third-round draft pick, so they wouldn't take Eric Haula, in the expansion draft instead of someone like Dumba. And Tuch remains a solid goal scorer in Vegas, while Haula scored 29 in his first season with the team, but has since moved on.
What you're going to see is the better your team is, the more depth you have. That's the whole idea behind the expansion draft. Let's say you got 15, 20 really good teams, playoff bound teams, Stanley Cup contenders. The idea is to poach somebody decent from them because they've got the depth. You get down to Detroit or somebody like that, they don't have the depth. Ottawa's in the catbird seat because most of their prospects are on entry-level deals anyway, so protecting who they need there is going to be much simpler. But you get down to the teams that are really struggling and in a rebuild, and I use the Detroit Red Wings as an example, they shouldn't be exposed to losing a really good player or a good prospect. It's the contenders, and that's the design of it. And nobody likes to lose a good player, but if you've got 17 of them and you're going to lose one, that's the price you pay for being really good.
Yep.
And that's the way it should work, I guess. So, but ultimately what you're going to see is you're going to see Seattle end up with some very good players, just like Vegas did. And where they take somebody that you go, why would they take him instead of, why would they take this guy instead of Dumba or somebody else? It's because they got a second round pick or they got a conditional first rounder in the next draft or something. So you're going to get a bunch of good players. You're going to get probably 13, 14 good players. You're going to get an extra dozen draft picks to leave people alone. And then at the end of the whole procedure, you're going to go into training camp with 30 really good guys to work with. So, and that's the one thing that has worked out well, and there's very smart people to put this together.
Next team in the article, Carolina. Carolina is a team that falls in on the basis that their expansion draft outlook is dependent on how they handle their UFAs. Dougie Hamilton is a UFA after this year, and based on his play this season is likely due a big pay raise. If he's unsigned and unprotected, you have to at least speculate that Seattle makes a big push for him. The other speculation is that the Hurricanes are likely to go the 7-3-1 protection route with the number of forwards they have and the fact that Jordan Staal takes up one spot with his no-move clause. If Hamilton is re-signed, Jake Bean, an RFA this summer, would likely shake available, and that's a player Francis chose in the first round when he was GM in Carolina. If Hamilton is unprotected, Seattle doesn't work out a deal with him, Seattle would likely choose between Warren Foegele, Jesper Fast, or Brady Shea. The other interesting question that Carolina's facing is in goal. James Reimer and Peter Mrazek are set to be UFAs this offseason, leaving Nedeljkovic as the one goalie to be protected.
Yeah.
But should Mrazek ink an extension before the draft, suddenly Nedeljkovic could be an option for Seattle if Mrazek is then protected. St. Louis is next. St. Louis will continue to just move on here. St. Louis, here in the article, it states that they think that St. Louis is one of the teams that has learned a hard lesson on what Vegas did. And the author of the article says, and I say that with the utmost respect for George McPhee, at that time of sort of manipulating the NHL to work under as the puppet master. Interesting to see your take on if you agree with that sentiment. But the article is quoted as saying, I think teams are less likely to have that happen again. Blues GM Doug Armstrong said after the 21 trade deadline. So that was a quote from Blues. So that quote was not actually from the author of the article. That was from Doug Armstrong.
Doug Armstrong.
When he said that I think everyone has learned a lesson on Vegas. And I say that with respect for George McPhee at the time of sort of manipulating the NHL to work under as the puppet master. I think teams are less likely to have that happen again. Doug Armstrong said, I think everyone was a little more cautious of what was coming up at the expansion draft. Yeah. The Blues stood pat at this year's deadline, which didn't make their expansion draft situation any more clear. The question here revolves around one big decision on the blue line, assuming Parayko, Krug, and Falk will be protected. That leaves Vince Dunn hanging in the balance. Protect him, and you're going to expose a few forwards who would provide Seattle with a range of choice. Leave him unprotected, and you're surrendering a 24-year-old quality puck mover who is an RFA this offseason. Dunn has been in the trade rumor mill for over a year now, so seeing that wrap up in a freebie loss to Seattle would be an underwhelming asset management and not what we'd expect to happen under Armstrong. But keeping him and the other three defensemen protected would leave Seattle to choose from either David Perron, who is Vegas's second leading scorer in their inaugural season, Robert Thomas, or perhaps Jaden Schwartz. Either way, the Blues stand to lose a very notable player if Armstrong doesn't work out a side deal in advance.
Right. Yeah, that's the tough one, and that's a perfect example. And I know you've got other teams to talk about, but that's a really good example. The fact that I would protect Vince Dunn at all costs, along with Parayko, be more likely to let a guy like Krug go, and certainly Justin Falk. Krug's not fit in very well so far there.
Yep. So next team is Nashville. Nashville, per this article, the next team is Nashville. Barring a trade to set them up differently, the Preds are as locked in as an 8-skater protection team as you can be. Defensemen Roman Josi, Ekholm, Ellis, and Fabro all need to be protected from Seattle. Up front, Philip Forsberg, Arvidsson are locks to be protected, but after that, there are many possibilities. Luke Kunin would seem to be a candidate for one of the last two spots. David Poyle said he was open to re-signing Michael Granlund. So if that happens, he'd account for the other spot, the protected spot. The question, too, in Nashville is how likely is it that both Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene are left unprotected?
Isn't Duchene on a no move?
Let me finish reading here and see if it says.
Go ahead. I'll take a look.
Both Johansson and Duchene have struggled this season, and both are signed with an $8 million AAV through 26 and 25, respectively. No doubt Poyle wouldn't mind shedding one of those deals off his cap and giving him some flexibility to change the roster around a bit, but Seattle might still need a sweetener to take either of those contracts. What would David Poyle be willing to do to make that happen? Question is cap space. Cap space is one of the best weapons you can have right now, so Seattle starting fresh can leverage theirs, but also must be careful where they do put those dollars down and what they get in trade for taking a bad contract. Basically, it's a situation by situation. It's going to depend on the player. It's going to depend on the AAV. It's going to depend on the term of contracts. Ron Francis is quoted as saying, "We're certainly
he's got a 7-team no trade."
Duchene.
Yeah, a player submits a 7-team no trade clause, and so if he hamstrings you if he submits Seattle to be one of them.
Yeah, Francis also said we're certainly open to having those discussions, but it's a case by case evaluation as to whether it makes sense for us short term or long term. Question: the other team for you that hits home for you, Toronto.
Okay.
At least per this article, they have Toronto. It's very likely Travis Dermott will be Seattle's pick.
And
that Toronto will protect 8 skaters and to go the 8-skater route. Matthews, Tavares, Nylander, and Marner are the forwards to protect. Riley, Muzzin, Brody, and Hall would be the 4 defensemen. However, it's not that simple. Every Leafs fan is wondering what the future holds for Zach Hyman.
They've got to sign him.
A critical piece of the team, but one who has earned a raise that just might price him out of Toronto.
Yeah.
If there is a compromise to be had here, and Hyman is able to stay, suddenly the Leafs would have to go the 7-3-1 protection route. Instead, the Leafs would end up protecting more forwards than they really need to, and would be left exposing one of their 4 defensemen mentioned above.
Yeah.
It's, of course, possible Hyman is left unsigned and unprotected and then comes back to re-sign with the Leafs after expansion. But that close to free agency and knowing there would be a number of suitors for him, it's a risk the Leafs may not want to take. Seattle may even be able to offer him a competitive and attractive contract in their negotiating window. Hyman's pending contract is an issue that looms over Toronto's offseason for plenty of on-ice reasons. But how the negotiation plays out will also impact the Leafs' plans for the expansion draft.
Well, that's where this is a very, very broad encompassing decision. I don't know what Zach Hyman is asking for. I know that everybody on that roster is screaming at Kyle Dubas to keep him. But if he's asking for a lot of money, then maybe you do have to expose a Jake Muzzin and keep a Travis Dermott, because Muzzin's a 5.6, and maybe Hyman thinks he's going to come up with a $4 million deal or something. I know Rasmus Sandin looks really good on the back end. A lot of it boils down to what Hyman is expecting, but I would say that barring him expecting a huge payday, which is not coming up during the flat cap, I don't see him going anywhere. There will be a move to either make a side deal or change the protection to 7-3-1 to keep him, and then expose a guy like Muzzin or somebody.
Last 2 teams for our discussion here per the article is Calgary and Dallas. Calgary first. One look at Calgary's roster, and you can see that they likely have to go the 7-3-1 protection route. There's just too many forwards who need protecting. One forward who has to be protected is Lucic. You know how I feel about Lucic, but
he's got the no move, so they don't have any choice.
Yeah. Unless, as expected, he waives his no movement clause.
Right.
The intrigue is on defense with Mark Giordano, who could be left available. Noah Hannafin, Rasmus Anderson, and Chris Tanev, all in need of protection. Even if Lucic does waive, the Flames might still elect to protect another younger forward, such as Dylan Dubé,
right,
or Glenn Gauvin. Would Seattle be willing to take a 38-year-old Giordano heading into his final contract? That's a question. That might depend on what else is available around the league and what they're trying to accomplish with the roster build in the short term. If they have designs on shooting out of the gate fast like Vegas, having the leadership and minutes you'd get from Giordano, if only for one guaranteed season, might be nice to think about. However, the biggest thing to watch with Calgary is how much of this will even apply to them come late July. A roster upheaval is anticipated, like has been rumored for a while. There's no way you can go into a new season with this exact same core and expect a different outcome or one remotely close to contending for a cup. Changes are going to happen, so how much of the roster will look different by the time protection lists are due?
Teams with upheaval coming, like Calgary is expected to have and is very necessary, they're going to be the last ones to submit their protection list. Because there is so much unanswered there. They're going to be trying to deal people. They're going to be trying to re-sign guys, and then they'll figure out the expansion list when all that's done. But this is a roster that needs a lot of turnover. This is not a happy place right now.
And finally, Dallas. We'll close things out this week with our discussion with Dallas here. Dallas is listed in the article as saying that Jamie Alexiak is their pending UFA. But he was not dealt the deadline despite interest from teams like Winnipeg.
Right.
That would leave the Stars having to protect 8 skaters, with Alexiak, Heiskanen, Klingberg, and Lindell all taking up a slot on the blue line. It would also leave them with tough decisions up front. Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, and Radulov all have no movement clauses.
Right.
We're already left there with one protection slot. Rupe Hintz and his breakout explosion would be a no-brainer choice to protect, but that also then leaves the likes of Radek Faksa, Gurionov, and even Joe Pavelski as unprotected.
Yeah, and that's probably the route they're going to end up going.
Yeah, you might look at Pavelski's age and think he'd be easy to let go of in any scenario with 1 year left, but he is their leading scorer and an X factor come playoff time, if Dallas even makes the playoffs this year. Plus, take a look at how the bottom fell out of San Jose when he left that dressing room, despite the fact he left a pretty good roster behind. Closing on Dallas, if Alexiak doesn't need to be protected or a side deal is worked out, it gets a lot easier for Dallas, who would then likely lose Jason Dickinson or a goalie unless they're going to take the chance of leaving Pavelski exposed anyway. So 9 or 10 teams there with some interesting questions heading into the expansion draft. But if you think about it with flat cap and COVID and things, it's hard to just say only 10 have interesting.
I was just going to say that. That's only 9.
I would argue that 31 teams have interesting decisions coming up based on roster upheavals, rebuilds, players they want or need to protect, side deals to make. What route do they go? 8 skaters or 7, 3, and 1. So I think it's nice for clicks and things on articles to really narrow it down to a certain few teams that might have the biggest questions. But I think especially in this time with the flat cap, all 31 teams have at least one interesting situation they've got to navigate. So
correction, 30 teams.
30, right? 30. Yeah. Can't forget that Vegas is miraculously so special and exempt.
Vegas is going to be busy sobering up from their Stanley Cup parade, apparently, when everybody else is scrambling around through the protection and off-season signings and trade deals.
I say this and watch them win the cup, but the best thing for me in this case, because they've been treated with kid gloves like they're so freaking special, is that flat cap this and whatever that they don't get it done, and now they have no choice but to blow up a roster. And it is what it is, rather than, hey, maybe I'll lose a guy and free up some cap room by losing a guy to Seattle. Ooh, okay. Well, now because we were treated as special, we didn't do that, and we still didn't win the cup. So now we'll crap. What do we do?
Well, think about this. Think about somebody that you might want to dump off your roster, and I'm not going to pick on anyone on that Vegas roster because they're a heck of a good team. But somebody you can't afford to keep, you need to clear up some space. I don't know if it's Marc-Andre Fleury based on no move clauses and whatnot. If it's somebody up front. But if you get a hold of Ronnie Francis and you go, hey, I know you're going to run short of these kind of guys, and you got some cap to spend. I'll give you this guy for a couple of second rounders. You're gonna end up with a busload of picks. I need a couple of picks for the future, and I need to get rid of this guy's salary. Do you want him? He's got a year left at $5.5 million. Then everybody's happy, and Vegas moves a guy that they wouldn't have otherwise moved. And I know they need all the help they can get right now, right? Poor Vegas.
Being at the top of the league every year and a President's Trophy candidate every year apparently isn't really tough, and they need the safe space to be able to deal with that. You gotta love. We are in the world of safe spaces, apparently.
Yes, safe space is very important. It's easy to look down the roster and see the questions, but there are so many moving parts on every one of those 29 teams, 30 teams, I guess, that, save for the guys like I said, maybe Detroit and a couple of others that are really struggling, Anaheim, it's not going to be as complicated for them. But everybody else they've got to look at trades and cap and re-signings and who can I move for what before we get to the exposure in the expansion deal. So anyway, I loved it this week. What are we doing next week, Evan?
Good discussion. Not a whole lot of junior stuff to talk about anymore, especially with the announcement that BCHL isn't going to have a playoffs.
Yeah, everything's shut down. WHL's down. So yeah,
it would be. And if one day we find ourselves on the United States side of the border, it might be easy to have these discussions, given that the USHL has had a season and things like that. But in terms of discussions,
I got a suggestion for you.
What's
I can reach out to our local goaltending expert, who just happens to be in town, and see if he's available next week. We can have a goaltending guest on and discuss keepers, not just in development, but around the league, and how that affects the playoffs and the expansion and everything like that. Let's have a goaltender discussion. Now we may have to use subtitles or something. Can you do that when you're only audio? Because I don't know if everybody can translate goalie speak or not.
Goalie speak, and depending on how riled up he gets, we may need a bleep button. We can cross that bridge when we get there. But
I'll see what we can do. I'll work that out and get back to you.
So, but no, that sounds good.
Great stuff this week.
Definitely do that. But yeah, it was good discussion. Good to finally have the expansion draft discussion, as we are now. How many days? What? Less than 100 days to.
Yeah, we're down to May, June. Yeah, probably 2.5 months from the less than 3 months.
60 days or so from, give or take, from things kind of rapidly moving a little bit. So, yep.
Yeah, it's going to be as of right now, there's fewer than 10 games left for just about everybody in the regular season in the NHL, and then the playoffs start, which is going to be spectacular because of that closed up format. It's going to be great fun. But let's have a goalie discussion if we can make that work next week. And sign off for me, will you? Tell everybody cheers.
Yep, I will. I'll sign off for you, and we'll get that done in the outro. Good episode this week, expanding on expansion. A lot of moving parts, a lot of details to factor in to the expansion draft, especially this year with COVID and the flat salary cap and all that stuff. But it is true. It is true what we said. It's fits in nice for a blog or an article or a podcast to narrow it down to specific teams that are facing kind of the biggest questions, the biggest conundrums, if you will, per that article. But every team, all 30, don't want to say 31, all 30, because Vegas is exempt. Self-explanatory reaction there. All 30 teams are facing some conundrums, obviously at different varying levels and degrees, but all 30 teams are facing some conundrums and interesting situations and interesting decisions for not only their salary cap moving into next season, but also the expansion draft. So anyway, a lot going on in life, a lot going on with the podcast, a lot going on with content, a lot changing and moving and all that stuff. So to my wonderful father who has joined me on this journey for this podcast, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you joining via Zoom week in and week out, as we are not able to be in person as of right now. That way we can continue to bring what I deem to be quality hockey content. So thank you again for joining on Zoom this week. I look forward to it again next week, and I look forward to being in person in studio again here in the very near future. So forgive me for saying a lot as I figure things out, but head to the necessary social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, as I mentioned in the intro, Worm the Hockey Podcast, at Worm the Hockey Podcast, respectively. Like and follow us there. Engage with us, share stories, ask questions, anything that you're curious about, anything that you feel you want to include, anything like that, heartwarming stories, tales of leadership, anything hockey media-wise, movies, anything like that. Share with us, engage with us. We love to hear it all. We want to hear it all, and we'd love to give you a shout-out and all the necessary ins and outs of making sure that you are appreciated as a listener and a fan, and your content and your contribution does not go unnoticed. So we appreciate it, and we hope that you engage with us and can continue to engage with us as we hope. And head to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, subscribe, rate, and review. All three are big. The rating and the review help us climb the charts on those platforms. It's really, really big, so we can continue to grow and can continue to put out the necessary content that we hope and truly believe that you all enjoy. So, a lot to look forward to in the coming week and weeks, plural. So, enjoy it, settle in, and we will see you all throughout the hockey community. Cheers.